be here now. Would that work?
We'll sit for a minute to settle down here. Enter the non-discursive state. So in our life of the Buddha, we left him with having overcome the temptations of Mara. And at that point, he's going to sit down and kind of look at everything very clearly and have a certain kind of experience. But before we go into that, which I will read from the wanted to back up with this very beautiful little meditation on death. And I'm living among the elderly as I do. I'm more aware of this than I have in the past when I only surrounded myself with beautiful young people like yourselves. So I thought this was particularly poignant, and this he really nails it here. It's called The Dart, a recollection on death. Life is unpredictable and uncertain in this world. Life here is difficult, short, and bound up with suffering. A being once born is going to die, and there is no way out of this. When old age arrives, or some other cause, then there is death. This is the way it is with living beings. When fruits become ripe, they may fall in the early morning, in just the same way a being, once born, may die at any moment. Just as the clay pots made by the potter tend to end up being shattered, so it is with the life of mortals. Both the young and the old, whether they are foolish or wise, are going to be trapped by death. All beings move forward towards death. They are overcome by death. They go to the other world, and then not even a father can save his son or a family their relatives. Look, while relatives are watching, tearful and groaning, men are carried off one by one, like cattle being led to the slaughter. So death and aging are endemic to the world. Therefore the wise do not grieve, seeing the nature of the world. You cannot know his path as to where he has come from or where he is going, so it makes no sense to grieve for him. The man who grieves gains nothing. He is doing no more than a foolish man who is trying to hurt himself. If a wise man does it, it is the same for him. Peace of mind cannot come from weeping and wailing. On the contrary, it will lead to more suffering and greater pain. The mourner will become pale and thin. He is doing violence to himself, and still he cannot keep the dead alive. His mourning is pointless. The man who cannot leave his sorrow behind him only travels further into pain. His mourning makes him a slave to sorrow. Look at beings who are facing death, who are living out the results of their previous deeds. People are terrified when they see that they are trapped by death. What people expect to happen is always different from what actually happens. From this comes great disappointment. This is the way the world works. A man may live for 100 years, or even more, but in the end he is separated from his relatives, and he too leaves life in this world. So we can listen and learn from the noble man as he gives up his grief. When he sees that someone has passed away and lived out their life, he says, "It will not be seen by me again." When a house is burning, the fire is put out by water. In the same way, the wise man, skillful, learned, and self-reliant, extinguishes sorrow as soon as it arises in him. It is like the wind blowing away a tuft of cotton. The person who is searching for his own happiness should pull out the dart that he has stuck in himself, the arrowhead of grieving, of desiring, of despair. The man who has taken out the dart, who has no clinging, who has obtained peace of mind, passes beyond all grief. This man, free from grief, is still. So that's the Buddha, delivering it straight up. But on a happier note, we'll now turn to the enlightenment of the Buddha, where he does in fact detach himself. So on the night of enlightenment, after he has overcome the temptations of Mara, he's now sitting there, it's night, it's clear, and he just rests. And he starts to have all these kinds of deep insights about the nature of human existence. And he sees, for example, first of all, he sees his own life fully, completely, in all the different things that brought in all the cause and effect in his own life. He sees even into the past, his past lives. He sees all the human condition of all the people and how karma has brought them into their current situation and their past lives and their past decisions. So he has this kind of cosmic view of cause and effect as it permeates the whole human condition. And sometimes you have that sense where you just see everyone and they're all, you can just sort of see how they got there. You can see so much about them. And in Sathis is even more. He can see all the way this endless stream of cause and effect. And so he's meditating on that. And let's see if I can get the right place here. So we'll start here and see where we go. Then, so it's different watches of the night. You realize there's different things. So this is towards the end, I think. Then as the third watch of that night drew on, the best of those who understand trance, the Buddha, meditated on the real nature of the world. Alas, living creatures obtain but toil. Over and over again they are born, grow old, die, pass on, and are reborn. Further, man's sight is veiled by passion and by the darkness of delusion, and from the excess of his blindness he does not know the way out of this great suffering. After thus considering, he reflected in his mind, what is it, truthfully, whose existence causes the approach of old age and death? Penetrating the truth to its core, he understood that old age and death are produced when there is birth. He saw that headache is only possible when the head is already in existence. For when the birth of a tree has come to pass, then only the felling of it can take place. Then the thought again arose in him, what does this birth proceed from? And he saw rightly that birth is produced from existence due to the power of the act. With his divine eyesight, he saw that active being proceeds from the act, not from a creator, or from nature, or from a self, or without a cause. Just as if the first knot in a bamboo is wisely cut, everything quickly comes into order, so is knowledge advanced in a proper order. Thereupon the sage applied his mind in determining the origin of existence. He saw that the origin of existence was found in appropriation, grasping. This act arises from appropriating the various vows and rules of life, sensual pleasure, views of self, false views, as a fire arises by appropriating fuel. Then the thought occurred to him, from what cause does appropriation come from? Thereupon he recognized the causal conditions of appropriation to lie in thirst. Just as a forest is set ablaze by a little fire when the wind fans it, so thirst gives birth to a vast sins of sensual passion and the rest. Then he reflected, from what does thirst arise? And therefore he concluded that the cause of thirst is sensation. Mankind, overwhelmed by their sensations, thirst for the means of satisfying them, for no one in the absence of thirst takes pleasure in water. Then he again meditated, what is the source of sensation? He who had put an end to sensation saw also the cause of sensation to be in contact. Contact is to be explained as the uniting of the object, the sense, and the mind, where its sensation is produced, just as fire is produced from the uniting of two rubbing sticks and fuel. Then he considered that contact has a cause. Thereupon he recognized the cause to lie in the 6 organs of sense. The blind man does not perceive objects, since his eye does not bring them in junction with his mind. But if sight exists, then that junction takes place. Therefore there is contact when the sense organ exists. Further, he made up his mind to understand the origin of the 6 organs of sense. Thereupon the knower of causes knew the cause to be name and form. Name and form is like kind of a categorical recognition of something, when we just see what it is and recognize it as such. Just as the leaf and the stalk are only said to exist when there is a shoot in existence, so the 6 organs of sense only arise when this kind of generic structural perception is in existence. Then the thought occurred to him, what is the cause of name and form? Thereupon he, who had passed to the further side of knowledge, saw its origin to lie in consciousness. When consciousness arises, name and form is produced. When the development of the seed is completed, the sprout assumes a bodily form. Then he considered, from what does consciousness come into being? Then he knew it is produced by supporting itself on name and form. Then after he understood the order of causality, he thought it over. His mind traveled over the views that he had formed, and he did not turn aside to other thoughts. Consciousness is the causal condition from which name and form is produced. Name and form again is the support on which consciousness is based. Just as a boat conveys a man, so consciousness and name and form are causes of each other. Just as a red-hot iron causes grass to blaze, and as blazing grass makes the iron red-hot, of such a kind is their mutual causality. Thus he understood that from consciousness arises name and form, and from the latter originate the senses, and from the senses arise contact. But of contact he knew sensation to be born, out of sensation thirst, out of thirst grasping, out of grasping existence. From existence comes birth, from birth old age and death arise. He rightly understood that the world is produced by causal conditions. Then this conclusion came firmly on him, that from the annihilation of birth, old age, and death, from the annihilation of birth, old age, and death are suppressed, that from the destruction of existence, or becoming, birth itself is destroyed, and that existence ceases to be through the suppression of grasping. Further, the latter is suppressed through the suppression of thirst. If sensation does not exist, thirst does not exist. If contact is destroyed, sensation does not come into existence. From the non-existence of sense perception, a sense contact is destroyed. Similarly, if name and form is suppressed, all of the senses are sense perception is destroyed, and the former is suppressed through the suppression of consciousness, and the latter suppressed through the suppression of the factors. Similarly, the great seer understood that the factors, karmic factors, are suppressed by the complete absence of ignorance. Therefore he knew properly what was to be known and stood out before of the world as a Buddha. So he's going to reverse the order of causality. The causality has this long thing beginning in ignorance and ending in birth, old age, sickness, and death, and he's going to work it backwards. So that's kind of, this is the essence of his sort of enlightenment experience that night, as that he goes back and undoes all the causality. And he goes to and there's certain places he kind of sees that if this doesn't happen, then that doesn't happen. If this doesn't happen, that doesn't happen, and all the way back. And we'll talk about that in a minute. There are different ways you can meditate on this. So the best of men saw no self anywhere from the summit of existence downwards, and came to tranquility, like a fire whose fuel is burnt out by the eightfold path of supreme insight, which starts forth quickly and reaches the desired point. Then as his being was perfected, the thought arose in him, I have obtained this perfect path, which was traveled for the sake of the ultimate reality by former families of great seers who knew the higher and the lower things. At that moment of the fourth watch, when the dawn came up, and all that moves or moves not was stilled, the great seer reached the stage which knows no alteration, the sovereign leader in the state of omniscience. When, as the Buddha he knew this truth, the earth swayed like a woman drunken with wine. The quarters shone bright with crowds of siddhas, and the mighty drums resounded in the skies. Pleasant breezes blew softly, the heaven rained moisture from a cloudless sky, and from the trees there dropped flowers and fruit out of due season, as if to do him honor. At that time, just as in paradise, mandarava flowers, lotuses, and water lilies of golden beryl fell from the sky, and bestrewed the place of the Shakya sage. At that moment none gave way to anger, no one was ill or experienced any discomfort, none resorted to sinful ways or indulged in intoxication of mind. The world became tranquil as though it had reached perfection. The companies of deities who were devoted to salvation rejoiced. Even the beings in the spheres below felt joy. Through the prosperity of the party who favored virtue, the Dharma spread abroad, and the world rose above passion and the darkness of ignorance. The seers of the race who had been rulers of men, the royal seers, the great seers, filled with joy and wonder at his achievement, stood in their mansions in the heavens and revered him. The great seers of the groups of invisible beings proclaimed his praises with loud utterances, and the world of living rejoiced as if flourishing. But Mara, the evil one, was filled with despondency as before a great precipice. Then for 7 days, free from the discomfort of body, he sat looking into his own mind, his eyes never winking, the Buddha. The sage fulfilled his heart's desire, reflecting that on that spot he had obtained liberation. Then the sage, who had grasped the principle of causation and was firmly fixed on the system of impersonality, non-self, roused himself, and filled with great compassion, he gazed on the world with his Buddha eye for the sake of its tranquility. Seeing that the world was lost in false views and vain efforts, and its passions were gross, seeing too that the law of salvation was exceedingly subtle, he set his mind on remaining immobile. Then, remembering his former promise, he formed a resolution for the preaching of tranquility. Thereupon he reflected in his mind how there are some persons with great passion and others with little passion. Then when the 2 chiefs of the heavenly dwelling saw that the Buddha's mind had taken the decision to preach, they were filled with a desire for the world's benefit, and shining brightly approached him. And as he sat, his aim accomplished by the rejection of sin and the excellent Dharma that he had seen as his companion, they lauded him and revered and addressed words to him for the good of the world. So the 2 gods who come visit him say, "Ah, does not the world deserve such good fortune that your mind should feel compassion for the creatures? In the world there exist beings of varied capacity, some with great passion, some with little passion. O sage, having crossed yourself beyond the ocean of existence, please rescue the world which is drowning in suffering, and like a great merchant, his wealth, bestow your excellencies on others also. There are some people here who, knowing what is to their advantage in this world and the hereafter, act only for their own good. But it is hard to find in this world or in heaven one who will be active for the good of the world." After thus addressing the great seer, they returned to the celestial spheres by the way they had come. After the sage had also pondered on that speech, the decision grew strong in him for the liberation of the world. At the time for the alms round, the gods of the 4 quarters presented the seers with begging bowls. Gautama, accepting these, turned them into one for the sake of his Dharma. Then at that time 2 merchants of passing caravan, being inspired by a friendly deity, joyfully did obeisance to the seer in exalted minds, and they were the first to give him alms. The sage then reflected on his former teachers, but the 2 who had minds capable of accepting this, he saw that they had both gone to heaven. So his thought turned to the 5 bhikshus. And then, wishing to preach tranquility in order to dispel the darkness of ignorance, as the rising sun in the darkness, he proceeded to the blessed city which is beloved, and his various forests, da da da. Then the sage, whose eye was like a bull, whose gait was like a rutting elephant's, desired to go to the land of Kasi in order to convert the world, and turning his entire body like an elephant, he fixed his unwinking eyes on the Bodhi tree. Yes. And so we covered that before. He goes off, and then he's going to, the first people who get the first sermon of these 5 former friends of his. So what happened? And I lost my sheet where I have the 12. Basically, everything, there's lots of different ways you can undo causality, or several different ways, we should say. One is that it all begins with ignorance. And ignorance is the positing of a self where there is no self. And seeing, once you posit a self, then everything is seen in a dualistic way, a separate way. So things are outside of you. Everything is in reference to you. So if you can destroy the sense of self as being real, which it's not, ego. So if this ego is a kind of a long-term illusion that we all suffer from, and that's the root ignorance that we all have that keeps the wheel of causality going. So selflessness, moments of selflessness, cut through ignorance. And if you cut through ignorance, the whole chain of causality collapses then and there. And that's somewhat at the Dzogchen and also in Zen, that's their approach. No self. So you hear no self, no self, no self. Because if you actually cut it at ignorance, that does it. Now once you have, if you don't do that, you have the ignorance, then what happens is that you get into this dualistic mode of thinking, and then the world appears as other, and it appears in a certain kind of way as you've been conditioned to see it. So we, being humans and being raised, we see things, we know what a car is, we know what a house is, we know what another person is. So we start to have this, that's name and form. It's the world of phenomenal objects. So out of ignorance, which is essentially duality, the phenomenal world then it manifests as something other than ourselves, other than pure empty form. And that then, we start to then relate to that world that we misperceived, that world of name and form. And, but actually, let's back up, I missed a couple here. That's why my list was it. Out of ignorance comes karmic formations. So if we don't see a sense of self, then we have this self, and the self has a kind of has a genetic karmic disposition. It's going to want to do things. So the self then wants to be an independent. The self then, these karmic formations propel us into experience after experience. So we misperceive the unity of everything. We see things as separate. We then start to relate to them in a karmic kind of way, and that becomes our that's our consciousness. Our mind is filled with our relationships with this imagined other world. And then we start to fill in the world with our categories, our name and form, and then we essentially, from a sort of a rough outline, we kind of color it in with the senses. So it's not just a block of car, but we notice the car is red, the car has this, and we have different sensual perceptions of all these phenomenal objects. And as we get the sensual perceptions, then from that arises sensations. So things that we like warm cinnamon rolls, come towards us, and we kind of, have the bonding experience. So we start to get these deeper relationships based on various sense perceptions. Things that we don't like seeing water pouring down from our ceiling, that we kind of, So we have all the kind of relationships, and we start getting sensations. And sensations then create feelings. So we notice something, and we have a feeling. And a feeling can be positive or negative. So if it's a warm cinnamon roll, we feel very positive, and we, you know, reach out for one of those. Some problem in the house, or there's some sound in the car, you know, I'm not going to deal with that. And so we have this feeling of, and what we want to deal with and what we don't want to deal with. And that leads then to the craving. So we smell the warm cinnamon roll, we're very hungry, whoop, down it goes. And then that's the grasping. So we want the cinnamon roll, we grab the cinnamon roll, we eat the cinnamon roll, and that's the becoming. We've done it. That's the action. We eat it. We eat it. And that could be anything. So all experience has this kind of quality of, you know, we're sparked into something, we have a desire, we go then to fulfill that desire, and that takes us into a new situation. And that's why he calls it becoming. So situations are piling on top of each other, and they're all driven by the self and its sensations and its craving and its grabbing and so forth. In all situations, not just human life in general, in the, you know, birth, old age, and death, but all situations have a birth. So there's the, you know, the whole situation of my morning cinnamon roll has a birth, and then I gobble it up, and I have a moment of happiness as I having eaten this delicious cinnamon roll, and then some new sensation comes up. I realize that, oh, I've got to go to work. And on and on and on and on. So that's, and there are variations on this, but that's the general idea of causality, that everything's just flowing there. Now, when the Buddha looked at it, he saw different places where you could reverse the, you could make a cut in causality. And of course, one of them is with ignorance. If you don't see a separation of self, then everything is selfless, and it's just the natural energy of the Dharmakaya, of the Buddha, of God, just pouring through you and everything, and there's no karmic accrual, and everything just then never happens, so to speak. The other way, and the original way that is practiced in early Buddhism, is the idea that you can make a cut at the point of grasping. That once you have this basic dualistic attitude, that you're seeing self and other, which is really hard to, you have to be in a transcendent mystical way to overcome that. But so normally, if once we got the dualism going, everything just automatically runs. You're going to see things separately. You're going to have, your mind's going to be full of it. You're going to know what it is. You're going to have the sense perceptions. You're going to have sensations. And you're going to have feelings about these things. Okay? And then there's going to, all right, so that's the point where you can actually do something. So you automatically runs, you see something, there's a feeling about it, you realize that there's a desire, and then there's the desire is the craving, and then there's the grasping. So what you can do to stop the process is not grasp. That's detachment. So rather than jumping on it and gobbling up whatever it is, you don't. You stop right there. So you also, the whole area of feeling, craving, grasping, that's the area where you can actually have some awareness, and that awareness can help you avoid this kind of mindless pattern of karmic activity. So that's sort of the traditional way you cut karma or karmic momentum, by not grasping. So you turn off the phone and set it down. You turn off the computer, you turn off the television, and you know, it's 1,000 different things you can turn off. And then you're there, so you stop. That's the point where you can stop. That's the moment where you can actually stop the momentum. Because you don't actually have to grab that thing. You just have a habit of doing it, right? But once you grab it, then the rest of it rolls out. Once you grabbed it on, you read the news story, Trump has eaten 5 children, and you go, oh my God, and And you're into that experience, and eventually that experience will wear itself out, but they'll take you into something else that now you've written checks to whatever, or done something in response to that. You've eaten more cinnamon rolls because you're so depressed that children are being eaten and nobody's doing anything about it. So that was his insight, that this karma has a momentum. It's this, and that you could stop it. You could either stop it by stopping, or you could, by not grasping, by being detached, or you could stop it by seeing, which meant seeing that there's no self. And those are the two ways, through meditation practice and everything, that you overcome karma. So we'll finish with we'll jump, take a little leap here, and so that's early Buddhism. Now this is late. The text I'm going to hand out is a very advanced Vajrayana text on how you stop the Nidanas. But what's interesting is that here we're in Tantra, 1,500 years later, and they're still talking about the Nidanas, number one, and how you stop them.
And the Nidanas are?
There's this 12 causal things.
Oh, okay.
Ignorance, karmic formation, consciousness,
Okay.
name and form, to birth, old age, sickness, and death. So this is Padmasambhava talking to his disciple Yeshe Shogol and telling her how she can become enlightened. And what does he do? He gives her the 12 Nidanas, which is very cute. Now, being a tantric text, she's going to do this all through working the inner energies of her body. But as you read through this, it doesn't tell you much about the inner energies of the body. It's really a talk about the 12 Nidanas, because in every case, she's pulling back everything that has dispersed itself. And that's, so the tantric part of it, or the inner yoga part of it, is rather simple. She just brings everything back. But what's interesting is how she works through each one of the 12 Nidanas and dissolves each one. So, we'll read. Padmasambhava taught Yeshe Shogol how to reverse the energy and cause it to ascend. So now it's this reversal idea of the Buddha is now reversing energy. So normal energy is to go out into the world and attach itself to stuff. We're going to turn that around and bring the energy back home. Okay. Shogol held the energy as in a vase, brought it upward, and produced ecstasy. So that's what happens when you reverse it. The bliss of continuing awareness was not adulterated by passion. Not for an instant did she succumb to laziness as she held her concentration intact. As Yeshe Shogol concentrated bodhicitta, her main central energy here, in the lotus of the female organs, she purified all ignorance, the first link of dependent origination. Holding the 1,080 motile currents associated with the first link of dependent origination, she achieved pristine awareness of the two comprehensions and reached the path of vision. Thus she reached the first spiritual level and the various kinds of prescience. So she, interesting, the ignorance is associated with the generative capability. Ignorance generates everything. And so it's associated in Tantra with the sex organs. And then it goes on. As she concentrated her life energy, her bodhicitta, in the secret chakra and transmuted it, she purified the karmic formations, the second link of dependent origination. Halting the motil currents of the second link, she reached the second spiritual level. By concentrating her energy in the area between the secret and navel chakras, she purified consciousness, the third link of dependent origination. And halting those currents, she reached the third spiritual level. In the same way, by concentrating bodhicitta in the navel chakra, she purified the tendency to distinguish and fixate on names and forms, the fourth link. Halting those currents, she reached the fourth spiritual level. She purified the mind concerned with samsara nirvana, pristine awareness and spontaneous arriving joy, and she became a svabhavakaya. By concentrating her life energy in the area between the navel and the heart chakras, she purified the senses, the fifth link of dependent origination, and she halts those currents, and she reaches the fifth spiritual level. By concentrating on the heart chakra, she purifies sensation, the sixth link, and she halts those currents and reaches the next spiritual level, and she attains the Dharmakaya. By concentrating a bodhicitta in the area between the heart and the throat, she purifies feeling and halts those currents, and then on. She concentrates it in the throat, she purifies craving and halts those. And as she halts each of these ones, as she moves up the chakras, she stops all the energies is now not dispersing, being out into the world, but is held. And that's how she's getting to all these different levels of spiritual realization. And then she concentrates the energy between the throat and the forehead. She purifies grasping. In the next one, in the forehead, she purifies becoming. And then she purifies between the forehead and the crown, birth. And then finally at the crown, she purifies old age and death, the 12th link. Halting all 21,600 motile currents, which are ways we could distract ourselves, our energy going out. They're coming out of all the different parts of our psychophysical being. She purifies the four impure occasions, the desiring mind, the dreaming mind, and the waking mind, as well as the four joys, the mind of patterning, energy, and vitality. She reaches the 12th spiritual level, attains Buddhakaya, Buddhahood, and its limitless qualities, taking the shape that benefits limitless beings.
So there's only, it says four impure occasions, but there's only three.
Desiring mind, dreaming,
and waking.
And the mind of patterning, energy, and vitality. Oh, the four joys in the mind of patterning, energy, and vitality.
I think the four impure occasions are different from the desire, mind, dreaming, and waking, although it's a little unclear there. I'm not sure. There are basically in the Hindu, which is shared by the Buddhists, there are four states. There's the waking state, the dreaming state. Let's see if I get this right. Deep sleep, and
the fourth?
the fourth state.
Turiya?
Turiya.
I think the fourth state is awareness.
Okay.
So there's four states, and each of those could have an impure quality. So it's all basically, it just means all different moments of the day, whether you're awake or you're sleeping or dreaming or whatever it is, that's all been purified. And again, the idea of purification here is that you stop this automatic, unconscious process that's dispersing your energies out into the world and getting you entangled in situations, and you're bringing it all back home. And you're bringing your energies back, and you're controlling your energies, and that produces bliss, that produces spiritual awakening. And that's what he's teaching her here. So it's very similar to what the Buddha did, and here it is again repeated as the instruction, even in Tantra.
And that's how your actions become your refuge.
Right.
turning back.
Yeah, it's reverse
Reverse
the
action.
flow. That's why in Zen they have a simpler way of saying it. They talk about going back to the source of the stream. So in Zen, there's this mountain stream and it's going down, and the sage, rather than being carried out to death, he goes back. He goes up, he reverses the pattern of the stream of life and goes back to the source. And then he realizes that the source is pure, and and then he resides at the source. He doesn't let himself be carried away into situations and entanglements and birth, old age, sickness and death and sorrow and lamentation and so forth.
It's an idea that the stream moves towards the land, it's not the other way around. It's not like the land comes towards the stream. So in that way you realize you are the stream, you have the control over spreading out like that. Or
Yes, the idea is that you have this ability, you can gain this ability to reverse the flow that's getting you entangled, right?
What you were saying before, though, is that you just have a couple points where you have that control, but you don't. There's a couple decision points where you can, and otherwise you're just pretty much swept.
like that one was grasping, I think you said. One point
Yeah.
you can turn it back, which that seems to be
And
the ascetic.
it's
point.
interesting because that aligns with what's known about habit formation and how and it studies having to do with addictive behavior, addiction and stuff like that, once you begin that, once you do the first step of whatever the habit is, then you really don't have a way out. You just, there's a rut there, a neurological rut, and you're gonna run it. But you have that point just before where and that's exactly what you were saying, even though that's, this is new research versus something so long ago, an insight from so long ago.
The Tibetans have a nice way of phrasing it. They talk about bardos. Bardos are spaces, okay? And so there's all these different spaces of it, and one is, one activity stops and another activity has not begun yet. And you can actually all test this one out. Mm-hmm. And that's called the bardo between, and bardo is a space between. So there's a space, something, you just got done doing something, and you're not, and that's been all, once you're engaged, you're engaged. So you stop doing that, and you go, all right, what do I do next? And it's those bardos are very vulnerable moments. And that's actually the moment where you can do what you just said. Because you can say, so I'm done with something and go, oh, well, what do I could light up the opium pipe. And, or I could not, but what happens is, like, a lot of times we hit those bardos and we're like, we don't know who we are. Because we kind of disappear in those bardos where we have this very uncertainty. And that's where the ignorance is. We don't know who we are. We've lost touch. Because we were engaged previously, but now we're kind of like in between things. We don't know who we are. And that's when we grasp. We grasp towards something familiar, like turning on the television set, picking up the phone, picking up the opium pipe, going to the kitchen and seeing what's around. Whatever it is, we have many possibilities. And that's where habit comes in, just like you mentioned. And actually, although you could do all sorts of things at that point, we tend to have a few favorite things we like to do when we get a free moment. But those free moments are really crucial, because that's the point where you can you can stop the flow. You can stop and just, okay, and have little pauses at least.
Mm-hmm. Practically speaking, it seems like that's the only moment you have to work with, because the other one, the alternative of just not being confused in the first place is, good luck with that. It's like,
Right, how do you get there?
I'll just not be ignorant.
Yeah.
It's an idea, but it's a hard thing to.
And because it's the root, it's kind of like once you've taken care of it, then, that's the final.
Well, the trick is getting there.
But that isn't exactly a technique, it's more of a.
Well, Dzogchen in a way works that one, and it does it in a certain way, and that is it reorients your identification. Instead of identifying with the self, you identify with space awareness. So you are, in fact, space awareness. And if you have the sense that you are space awareness, that cuts ignorance. So when you have these bardo moments, you're not like, who am I? You immediately go back into space awareness. So that's the space awareness is, in fact, cuts ignorance. So actually Dzogchen goes at the ignorance, because the other way, although it does, from a certain point of view, if you don't have the ability to drop all your thoughts into that space awareness, which is not common, then you can make these cuts. Boy, it's there's a lot of habits out there, and you got to, every bardo, every moment, you got to be cutting those, that's tough. So the Dzogchen thinks that, from the Dzogchen point of view, it's easier if you can just realign your fundamental identification away from a self to, I am space, I am nothing, I'm just space, I'm air, I'm that.
And so the other part of that don't grasp is where like the ascetic path comes in, or the discipline.
Well, in some ways, they're sort of the same idea. Because where am I going to, I have these moments, right? And again, if I can stop and sort of relate to space, awareness at that point, if I stop, I'm going to be aware. So that sort of puts me in that same mode. So you can use all those bardo moments as a way to reconnect with space awareness. And that also then cuts the momentum. So, but the key point here is that liberation comes from breaking that momentum, that unconscious propelling momentum that just carries us through situation to situation. And of course, we indulge in something, and then we binge watch television, and then we feel terrible after that, and it takes, whatever it is. Most everything that we do to make ourselves feel better has a little, has birth. It has a at the beginning it's really nice, and then later it's not so nice, depending on what it is, when we have after effects or not.
So, it seems like free will is a part of this. Like, free will in this sense is more like the freedom to not grasp and to not identify, rather than the freedom to do this or that. Like it reverses freedom in a way too. Like, our sense of freedom is like, I can do this, I can do that, I can do anything. Here it's, I don't have to play on my feelings. I can just let them
Right, it
arise.
assumes that we have free will in that way. That's how otherwise we're doomed, right? If it's automatic and we can't ever do anything, then, well, that's a different philosophy. That's an interesting philosophy, but more on But then you might as well just relax and enjoy it. So that might work. So either way, it works the same way. You gotta. But the idea particularly with Shakyamuni Buddha, is that you can have some self-restraint. Whether that's actually possible or not, I'm not so sure, but Shakyamuni believed that you could you could restrain yourself from.
But once you're here, you're dealing with a certain karmic situation, I think you call it. You kind of started from there, and then so that could be difficult to overcome right there. If you're, in the form, your karma's formed you in some way that, you don't see things like everyone else. Like, water to you is boiling magma or something. Instead, you have this totally different karma, like hungry ghosts or something to that effect. And
Well, yeah.
you're dealing with that right away. So.
Free will only exists in the human realm. That's why the human realm is really important. He feels like in the human realm you actually can stop. You can, he did. So he feels everyone else could do that too. In other realms, like the hell realm, you can't have you can't find a moment of peace to stop it. In the other realms, you're too preoccupied to ever you stop. And but the human realm is actually all these 6 realms, you know, from hell beings and hungry ghosts and jealous gods and all that. Those are really all exist within the human realm.
Right.
And so you can, you know, when you look out onto the world as large, you see there are people that are preoccupied with certain kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for example, Trump is in the jealous God realm.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of a low rent jealous God, but he's a jealous God, and he's not in the way he's going to stop.
Right.
You know what I mean? He's in a battle.
Mm-hmm.
He can't stop. You know, he's under compulsion. Some movie star who's beautiful, rich, loved by everyone, they're not going to stop. And no, so you're in these God realms. All the other realms are so intoxicated, so overwhelming, so preoccupied. But the human realm, we have the great advantage of boredom. You know, the other realms, you don't ever get bored, and for better or worse. But here we have space, we have boredom. We can start to talk about these things. We can sit and not do anything. So that's only possible in a.
Well, I think the other realms probably have intrinsic built-in things that make them unsatisfying. I mean, I would think that a jealous God realm, you go through life with a significant lack of intimacy, because you can't trust people because they're always, you know, because you're always in a power struggle with people, and you can't actually relax and have. It's hard. It's harder. It's hard to have intimacy anyway. But it's harder if you're in a realm where you feel like people are always trying to get your stuff, or you're trying to get their stuff, or you're always jockeying for position. You're not going to have that kind of open-hearted, kind of human experience. And so in each realm, I think there's a place where you get hungry for something that you actually is really hard to get to in that realm, and that helps to, if you're listening, it helps to. If it can help to wake you up.
That's an interesting. There is in the Wheel of Life. You don't have a Wheel of Life handy.
I have
a big
in one of the books.
It's supposedly drawn by the Buddha, right? I mean, the idea was that he painted it for a king or something.
I mean,
This has it right here in the very back.
All
There's
right.
probably a bigger image.
Well,
Inside of
you
it.
can't see this here, but in each of the 6 realms, there is a Buddha. And that means that there is a possibility, there's a Buddha in the hell realm. That means you could wake up in the hell realm just under the circumstances you're talking about.
right.
And then you sort of all of a sudden wake up to the fact that this
This isn't
insane.
working.
This isn't, you know,
Right.
I can't do that, you know, you exhaust, at that point you
Yeah.
start to exhaust the driving force. And you see that with certain habits. I mean, for a long time you might have been addicted to one thing or another. And then you just get tired of it. You know, you just don't want to watch any more, you know, television. You know, just knowing you throw it, you get rid of it, and you're tired of it. And you hear that all the time. Somebody they stop smoking, and they never have they stop whatever it is that's been causing them problems, and it's just done. They've exhausted it, and that's your kind of bodhisattva in the lower realm phenomena, don't you think?
So
Well,
there.
No,
Go ahead.
go on. No, go on.
I was gonna say seems to be like a way to cut through karma and the momentum, and then just the sheer exhaustion of karma. Like, are those two separate
If
things?
you don't-
or?
No, there are separate things, because the cutting happens because there's a space. There's between activities, so you can kind of reconnect to, ground yourself in Buddhahood, Buddha energy. But the other one is you exhaust,
That takes longer.
and it's way painful and has
Yeah.
after effects,
Right.
and
That's
yeah.
like the longer path is to actually live out an exhausted.
I exhaust my desire for alcohol, but of course, meanwhile, I've ruined my liver.
Exactly, right.
So is that
right.
when you exhaust karma in one realm, it doesn't mean you're gonna wake up, it means you're gonna be put into another, like you were in the God realm of alcohol, intoxication, now
That's
you're
the guy.
in the hell realm of liver disease and all.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
and you've spent all your money, you've ruined your family
Yeah.
connections, you're isolated, you feel sick, yeah, blah, 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 right, yeah, that's where you can tumble.
Well, that's what naturally happens.
Right.
If you don't have any spiritual practice, you eventually will exhaust your habits. Whatever bad habits you'll have, it will
They
exhaust
will
it.
eat you,
In time, they'll eventually consume you,
right,
and that'll be the end of that.
right,
But then the next habit kicks in. So in some ways, exhausting your bad habits, what I call the prayer mat of the flesh way of doing it,
right,
would not really work.
right,
It sounds good, but it doesn't. Well, just do it until you can't do it anymore, then you're free. But no, actually what happens is you get another one, because you haven't really gotten rid of thirst. You've just transferred it from one form to another. So I'm tired of alcohol, but now I'm going to chase something else.
right,
And
right.
I'm tired of that, I'm going to do that. You're just changing the object, but you haven't gotten rid of the lack that you feel
Right.
in that whole process. So that doesn't, it's not really actually a work. He didn't recommend that. The prayer mat of the flesh recommends that, but that's not actually the Buddha giving his view of it.
So I guess it's a process of people, people waking up into a level of misery, of just unease, misery, pain, suffering, and then they hear, like you either hear, Jesus will save you if you go through this process, then you'll be changed and things will be different, and that appeals to you, or you hear the Buddha saying that this suffering you can actually, and if you engage and you keep engaging, then eventually you actually start getting a daily practice, however long that takes, 10 years, before you actually start engaging in a daily practice. And then it actually starts to work. You actually start to have your mind calm down a little bit, and you actually start noticing these spaces, and then you hear another bit of teaching, and it's like, oh, okay, I can actually see where this could be going somewhere, even though, so,
No, it's exactly like that, and it is a very infinitely slow process, even
Yeah.
in the best circumstance.
yeah,
And it's funny because when we were 18, 19, when we heard this, the first time, we
I'm
thought,
going to become enlightened.
I'm going to start meditating. When I started meditating, I thought, I'm going to be Buddha in a year, 2 years, 3 years at most.
Right.
I had no idea, it was deep.
Right.
I was in deep. You don't realize, because you get excited, you found, or even with Jesus, the same way.
Right.
I found Jesus, and oh boy, everything's going to be hunky-dory from here on out. But obviously it's not. You can,
Yeah. But on the other hand, you've obviously had a good life, you've made good choices, there's a point where all
it gets
of that,
better.
It gets better,
Uh-huh.
yeah, but it does, it just,
I think there's just a different quality to your life when you feel that you're on a path, and that you're at least learning from things, or you're at least you sort of have a different perspective with hard knocks. It's like at least.
Well, the Buddha, though, he stopped looking outside of himself.
yeah,
And I think that's where it's a little different from praying to Jesus or something to do it for you. He turned it around to where he saw that he understood cause and effect, that his actions were.
Yeah, Buddha's definitely on, you have to step in yourself. Classic line, looking for external saviors has brought no success. That's now Christians would argue with that, but that's the Buddhist point of view, is that something external from yourself can't really do the job. You have to do it.
well, except that it really isn't.
They are
yourself.
actually
That's-
helping you in a subtle way that you don't really appreciate, and so forth and so on, like they help the Buddha. So they're not there helping you, but as you experience it, you have to make some effort.
Well, no, I actually think that the I-thou relationship can, I mean, my understanding is that that you can take the I-thou relationship all the way into a pure, pristine state of awareness. That any of those doorways, the I-thou or the just the you know, it's all inside of me, I think those can all work if you work it far enough.
Yeah. I'm not so sure on the I thou. I mean, I think, yeah, possibly, because if you had a strong sense of the thou, then that dignifies the I, and then you end up in a kind of both being in a sacred space, which accomplishes that purpose and erases the boundary, so that you're not profane, God, you know, and you do it that way. Buddhism, I'm more likely, my view of my version of it is more that God is to see God as empty, and then see myself as empty, and then we're the same. We share our emptiness.
See, that doesn't do anything
Which
for me
is,
at all.
which is radiant and clear and,
Yeah, I have
has
trouble with the empty
characteristics.
part. I always
The
have to-
emptiness
I
has
always have to-
characteristics, or else that doesn't work.
I mean, it's not,
But I like the part about not looking outside, at a certain point, not looking outside of yourself for the,
Well, empty, I gotta defend it just one.
Yeah, I was gonna say, let's
Not,
take another shot at that.
if you look at as God as something or some being, then it's tough. And so to see the non-being, the non-thingness, because if it's all, it's not a thing,
right?
and the all and the empty are the same. You know what I mean?
I sort of.
Because you're not.
But not emotionally, not
Not
quite.
emotionally.
Yeah, I mean, I get that it's one of those
You don't
mystery
get-
words, it's one of those words that is standing in for.
Well, that's because you're Hindu beginnings.
Yeah.
Well, that's a big difference.
Yeah.
Hinduism is definitely, there's something. And Buddhism starts, so Buddhism, we get very warm and about shunyata.
No, I think shunyata is a better word for me because since it's foreign to me,
Uh-huh.
and the word emptiness, I would say spaciousness or mystery would be a better word. I
All
mean,
right.
you know, because just the word emptiness doesn't, but I would say if you talk about, I'm a mystery, this is all a mystery, it's all the same mystery.
All right.
Yeah, it's just, that makes sense to me. I go, yeah, this is definitely mysterious.
But you don't have that experience unless you empty your mind of thought, so.
Emptiness is part of the process.
wouldn't, like Guru Yoga and the Vajrayana tradition doesn't, I mean, it starts out with the outer recognition of perfection before you can, like, see it in yourself, right? Isn't, there's sort of the outer before the inner.
Well, in fact, what we're talking about here, early Buddhism, their basic thing is meditation and devotion to the Buddha. And the things like the life of the Buddha are to get you to have a real good feeling of what it is to be a Buddha. And the Buddha is this ideal, just like, you know, Christ is an ideal.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to be more like the Buddha, or you want to be more like Christ. And yeah, you have this external image of the ideal that you're then trying to, through meditation, lift yourself towards that ideal. And so yeah, that's a classic. And that's how the early Buddhism is very simple that way. And then in Guru Yoga, it's not an imagined ideal, like, you know, imagining what the Buddha is like or imagining what Jesus was like. You have Jesus in front of you, or the Buddha in front of you, and that's how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
And these teachers that are extraordinary teachers, like the Karmapas or the Dalai Lama, you get in the presence of one of these radiant beings, and it's like having the Buddha in front of you, or like Jesus in front of you. I mean, you knocks your mind right out like that. And
But it comes back.
it does come back. True.
Yes, it does.
But they can knock it out, which is amazing.
Well, I see the process of my current sense of approaching no self has always felt vulnerable and like watching somebody with no self-esteem, you know, somebody who gets taken advantage of, somebody who gets consumed by external forces. And I'm finding myself actually beginning to shift to a place where the idea of dropping the self is like taking off a really tight bra. It's just like, it's like taking off something that's incredibly restrictive and fundamentally unpleasant. And you know, it's something you can put back on if you want. Yeah, yeah, exactly. You can put it has its purpose, you know, but you take it off as soon as you don't need it anymore. That's more of the relationship with the self, and it's just something you can remove.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's a good way to look at it. I have trouble with self, non-self, because first of all I have to create something that doesn't exist to get rid of it. You know what I mean? So it's easier. What I like about Dzogchen is I don't really think about the self, whether I have one or I don't. I just forget all about that part of it. And what I'm doing is just each moment I'm not holding on to thought. And by not holding on to thought, I empty my mind. And by emptying my mind, there's no self, because it's a mind created fabrication. So I find it easier just not. So that's not holding on to my thoughts. So everything just. And then,
starts to unravel.
so you let the thoughts, you know, every moment you're letting go, and then there's space, and then some, you know, and you're letting go, and the next thing comes up, and you know, so like waves, you know, choo, 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 choo. And the space gets wider, and the thoughts get less intense, and
So that's like both of those on the Nidanas. That's the ignorance one and the grasping one at the same time, because on the one hand, you've got this sense of space awareness as your primary ground, and then on the other, thoughts come up, and the normal, we grasp at a thought and we work a thought and we turn it into another thought and we turn it, so we're you're describing cutting the grasping at such a granular level of each
well,
thought.
that's the whole principle of meditation, isn't it? I mean, we're letting go of thoughts as they arise. So we can't go out. I mean, you can cut things in situations and habits like we talked about earlier, but the basic practice is to drop thought, because it's all happening in your mind anyway. So if you can go right there, that's the best training, and that's why we do meditation as our really one practice, even though we have many variations of it.
I don't know, I can from kind of a religious transcendental moment you might have at one time or another, I can imagine not caring about myself or what happens to me. Being so Christian, if you want to call it that I just forget about all my worries about what people are going to think of me, how this is going to work out. That I can imagine, but I can't stop feeling that I am a person, and that my consciousness has a continuity that sort of defines my existence. I don't understand how people could say I'm not anyone or something like that. I've never been able to get that.
Well, like you said, that continuity, what is that continuity? It's a continuity of individual moments.
Yeah.
So it's not one thing.
Yeah.
So we're going to say, you know, I'm a me, you know, it's what one thing are you? And you can't.
Yeah, I can't ever really answer that. I can never really answer that, but.
And that's where the idea of emptiness comes. It's empty.
Yeah, well, it's
inherent.
an emptiness, just like Bruce was saying. It's another great way to try and break down the whole pattern. But when it's all broken down, I still can't visualize what it's going to be.
Well, it's
So
not
you don't
anything
have
at
to.
all. Right?
I have to, yeah.
No, I mean, you're disappearing all the time. I mean, I'm more disappeared than I'm appearing. I mean, you're not not there, I mean, there's just space there.
Mm.
When the thoughts aren't there, there's nothing there.
But there's awareness there.
But awareness is nothing. I mean, it doesn't have, it's, you can't, it's not a thing. It's not a, you can't hold on.
Knife can't cut itself. So you can't deal with that.
Yeah, first we have emptiness, now we have knives going through.
Well, to each his own. Well, I'm sure we went way past our promised time of 5 o'clock. Oh, not too bad.
How, yeah, I think we probably
20
need to
after.
be out of here.
Well, thank you all for your
Thank
great
you.
patience.
Thank you for
and,
putting this all together.
being able to sit all day long like this and talk about obscure things.
It's good.
So we'll look at it. By this
By this
merit,
merit,
we all obtain omniscience,
May it defeat the enemy of wrongdoing, from the
from the
stormy
waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara,
may
may
I
I
free
free
all
all
beings.
So we have homework or assignment or anything?
Practice.
So
Oh,
Diane, your
time and
discussion
date,
takes me
For the
right
next
back,
Thursday,
like
is there-
66.
Uh,
I do a semester independent project because I wanna get at what the difference is between.
It will not be this Thursday.
And this emptiness.
And I'll in
that
April.
I'm so excited about.
Uh-huh,
And
uh-huh.
that's